The question is, and I've made a minor change to the question because I think it makes more sense. Our previous panel was talking about existing labelling systems, and now we want to talk about the benefits and opportunities of perhaps a single Australian labelling system. And the words on your page say, to what extent would farmers, industry and consumers benefit? It seems to me to change that, to what extent would farmers, wholesaler retailers and then consumers benefit? In other words, the three segments, the producers, the marketers, the consumers. And then we'll go to what additional gains could be achieved, financial, environmental and social. So firstly, I would invite the panel members to talk about to what extent farmers would benefit, and then we'll go to what extent would wholesale retail benefit, and then we'll go to what extent would consumers benefit, and then if we've got time, we'll talk about the final three, the triple bottom line. So who would like to kick off? If you've got the microphone on your table there. Who would like to talk about the benefits and opportunities to farmers with a single labelling system? Anybody can start.
They tell me that I'm the farmer, so I can start. I think one of the things I look at as a farmer is that there are a whole lot of things that are outside our control, and in the 90s we actually did do a branded beef product. And the reason we could actually confidently do that branded beef product as a small group of producers around Geelong was because we had a new exciting innovation, and this was 1996, of Meat Standards Australia. And so MSA enabled us to have the confidence to underpin, and going through MSA auditing processes and being licensed that way gave us the confidence to then market our beef. So we had our brand. I see the same concept being extrapolated out from 11 families around Geelong to agriculture, is that a brand can underpin the confidence so that you can actually get on with telling your story, talking about the things that Heather and Greg were talking about this morning, where we talked about the fact that we could trace what you were eating, but more than that, we took our line from muesli boxes, where they talked about the experience. And I used to talk to our butchers about we were the experience beef. So they might have everyday beef, but when people wanted to have a special experience, this was the beef they bought. And we wanted to be the beef that created memories for families and for couples, and around Valentine's Day we would do extra marketing. So we didn't have to keep going on about the fact that it was guaranteed to be tender and tasty and those sorts of things, because that was the underpinning. We were able to share our unique story. We were able to talk about our families. So to me, if we take that to a national level across all agricultural products, you have the confidence of an assured system that then lets you as producers be the storytellers.
I think it's a good question, and the question about what was single labelling system, what might it offer to farmers, etc., and we'll talk about those in a moment. So I'll answer by saying what it needs to offer for it to be of any use to farmers or anybody else. And so talking about farmers, it has to, in my view, it has to offer a increased profitability. Otherwise, it's not worth doing. So what does that? Thank you. So what does that mean? Well, there's only three ways you can increase profitability on a farm business or any business. And one is by increasing price, and that's the one we talk about most. Secondly is by increasing productivity, or how much you produce. And the third way is by decreasing costs. So let's think about how a single brand might impact on any of those, one of those three profit drivers, if you like. And I think when you boil down to it, most of the discussion that we've had today is about how a brand or a label, or whichever term we're talking about at the time, might increase price by giving some market advantage. So if we can do that by meeting the consumer's needs, by increasing the demand for our products, whether that's domestically or internationally, or increasing the demand for the products that have got that label, either domestically or internationally, well, that might give us a price advantage. The other aspect of price is about market access, because at the end of the day, if you can't sell it, well, its price is zero. So we might want to be able to maintain market access, but have a brand that's going to help us maintain up market access either domestically or internationally again. So we can see how we might have a benefit for price. What about the other bits of the profit equation? And this is where I want to go back to probably, I really like the red tractor example that we talked about this morning, where we're not just talking about labels that give us, make our product look good in the market, but we're talking about labels that do other things like meet some of those regulatory requirements, and replace a lot of the other systems that we've had in place. Now, I was making a list before of all the various types of labelling systems that existed and have existed over the years, and sort of come into this discussion. And that's everything from EMS type things to quality assurance systems to best management practice programs and systems. Someone mentioned the cotton one in the last. The various food safety accreditation systems that different businesses have to go through too, et cetera, and you can list them all. So again, I'm really attracted to the idea of having one label, if you like, or brand that sort of covers off on all those areas. I'm not sure whether that's possible or not, but it's a good direction to head in. So that was a roundabout way of saying that potentially, if we came up with something that did that, it may help us increase productivity by improving the adoption of good management practices at a farm level. And then the final aspect is about how could it reduce costs. Well, the red tractor gave us some good examples about how it reduced the cost of multiple audit processes, so that's important. And the numbers that was mentioned there were very low. I think we were talking sort of £150 or something, I think was the... that's very low compared with what any of our Australian auditing systems would cost producers, so if we can get things down to that level, that'll help a bit. But then there's also the legislative, as well as that. Yeah, the other way we might be able to reduce costs is to reduce the costs associated with some other legislative compliance systems. So, yeah, I think it might be idealistic, but if a system that did all of that and resulted in more profit for farmers would be a good start.
Thank you.
Okay, my answer is a bit more broadly, and I might be blurring the lines between farmers and other sectors of the industry, but I think one of the key things that I bring to this table as someone who's from outside of agriculture is that the community and consumers see you all as farmers. You might be a grain farmer, you might be a watermelon farmer, but you are farmers. And if a single label like this, I think one of the key things this might actually do is bring agriculture together to start presenting a united face to the community. I think industries that don't learn have very short futures. And at the moment, you've got the meat industry learning a lot about beef buyers and beef buyers in Australia and internationally. And you've got other sectors also repeating the same research with the same people. And that is a waste of money and time that I don't think the industries have. So I've, struggled to go around and speak to every industry body about what I think my kind of research could actually deliver. And it's all been, but it needs to deliver a profit back to my farmer in town X. And I think it's really time for agriculture to start talking to each other, and some of the issues the previous panel was raising about we have diversity in production systems, we have diversity in whether we're a niche marketer or whether we're a bulk commodity producer. It might be time for agriculture to start having that conversation internally and then start to engage the broader public. So for me, I think it is time that this might actually be a way to get agriculture to start talking to each other and stop trying to claim the moral high ground from other sectors. If somebody wants to have chicken one meal and beef the next, maybe it's not about these other things, and maybe that's okay. So I still see that as a way to drive productivity and profitability within the sector, but it's operating outside of one individual farmer's pocket. It's a much more broader, bigger picture idea.
Yes. And good luck with that. No, I think that what you're saying is absolutely spot on, and I think that across a whole range of areas for agriculture we are having to have this same conversation, whether it's about advocacy, whether it's about labelling. We have to start working together and stop trying to poach each other's territory and competing I mean, ultimately, we need to be, as you said, seen as farmers and work together as farmers. And I think that the National Farmers Union in the UK has, you know, it's got something like 70% representation and is able to work with Red Tractor and kick some goals. And I think there's some real lessons for us in there. I also think it's a little bit arbitrary to try and split the benefits up into these different components, because unless it benefits all parts of the supply chain, then it's not actually going to work. It has to benefit farmers, it has to benefit consumers, it has to benefit the retailers, and it has to have a broader societal benefit. So unless we can achieve that, then it's not really worth continuing the conversation. But I think, as I said earlier, for consumers, I think it's about giving them the capacity to choose the products that they want, that resonate with them, both emotionally and for a whole range of reasons. And I think the Nielsen data that comes out is really quite interesting, because it shows that what consumers say they want and what they actually put in their trolleys is quite a different thing. And so we really need to be looking at both of those things. I think that what you said earlier, not you weren't sitting next to me before. Greg said earlier about social licence. I think that's where it's at. I think that in Australia, I was really interested in the £80 benefit that you get per head of livestock. I'd be quite interested to know what it is per carrot, but anyway. But I think here it's actually about social licence. It's about continuing to actually have the ability to farm. We are probably under greater pressure from the environmental movement. We've got, you know, farming in the Great Barrier Reef catchment is under intense scrutiny. And if we can have a system that we can demonstrate our environmental credentials, both to the consumers who currently think that we're, you know, killing the Great Barrier Reef, and that's a really big one for us. We need to make sure that we have something that has that capability, and that picks up on the BMP aspect that you were talking about. And the whole point about best management practice is it's not best management practice unless it delivers to the bottom line of the farmer. So that's what best management practice is, and we need to invest in research to ensure that we know what those best management practices are. And a label is just like a culmination of all of these things that enables us to have the systems that underpin it to deliver the support for our important farming communities, I guess.
Just very quickly, there's probably only three things that I'd like to mention. Firstly is that I think for too long agriculture has left it up to others in the supply chain to tell its story. You know, for too long we rely on banks and supermarkets to explain ag, and this 1950s style of agriculture, which is long gone. Australian agriculture, it's technologically savvy, and yet it's not reflected in the storytelling and the messages that we've got as an industry. And I personally am very frustrated by that, and I think this would help enable us to move down that path. I think the underpinning industry integrity systems behind that label is absolutely imperative here. A key advantage to producers is that it would enable you to control your own destiny. Now, of course, in Australian agriculture, again, you know, the likes of our brand owners, the likes of our major retailers and, you know, McDonald's, etc., they're the ones who have got the whipping hand here unless we actually go forth and develop our own industry standards, and that's what will happen if we don't. We've seen it. If you want to be complacent, if you don't want to continually improve over time, you'll have them imposed upon you and you will not be able to control what those standards are. Now, that's the key advantage of that first point advantage. The third thing I'd like to mention is about brand awareness. Australia has got some great attributes of its product. You know, clean, green, disease-free. Everyone knows that in ag. We don't do a great job of selling that. I think a country that has done a great job of that is New Zealand. That pure 100% pure New Zealand, that logo, originally used in tourism, they now use it for all their produce, and it's got such great brand awareness because of it. There's nothing to stop Australia doing the same thing, and I think there's an opportunity there. I think True Aussie certainly went down that path. Whether we quite nailed it there, I think we can probably debate, but they're just a couple of things that I thought I'd mention.
If I may just come back to this sort of citizen, consumer, social licence to operate kind of area. A lot of market research is really based, again, on what consumers buy, and I think we've kind of got the message now that things like price and taste and everything like that are operating along the consumer line. you almost have to envisage that there's two halves of people's brains. There's one bit that goes shopping and there's the other bit that votes. And they don't actually communicate. And although I'm no neurophysiologist, that's almost what the research is telling us. So while a brand like this will provide opportunities to drive information through the consumer chain, it could also still operate through that community chain, because again, you're demonstrating to the community through this social license to operate idea that you share the same values as the community. So you're still producing the safe, affordable food. I don't like saying cheap, because people who have more money do spend more on it. I like saying affordable within whatever people can buy. So you're still producing the safe, affordable, traceable food that people want to buy, but you're also sharing the values with the broader community and demonstrating a commitment to that, which drives your social license to operate. Because in theory, a logo and a social license to operate should actually work in opposition. But if you have them, they can actually work in both ways.
Okay.
A tiny bit to that. Just in terms of the connection with consumers, one of the from a farmer perspective, one of the things we've kicked off recently is the Friends of Ag campaign, and some of you might have read about an ambassador that we've started working with called Jodie Allen. She has a blog called Stay at Home Mum. So she has about 470,000 followers on Facebook, and if nobody in this room knows her, apart from probably a couple of young mothers here, that's okay, because we aren't her market and we're not trying to connect with her. We're actually wanting to influence decisions in the grocery shopping and decisions at the ballot box. And the billboards that have gone up in Brisbane and the things that will happen on her blog over time, the billboards say our family needs farmers. So Jodie herself is saying, I need farmers. And she speaks to a whole lot of people. And this is the sort of positioning in terms of we want to work with them. We don't want to be aggressive about it. It's just that that's her state of fact. So using that third-party endorsement around what farmers are, and we haven't tried to say that's around because Agforce is red meat, grain and wool. We haven't said, and the same with our Every Family Needs a Farmer campaign. It's about farmers, because people just see agriculture generally. They don't break it down, but it is about influencing decision-making at those critical points.
Okay. It seems to me that the responses that the panel have given us have canvassed all of the dimensions that we were hoping to talk to. So what I invite you to do now is your 10 minutes, 3 minutes in your heads, then prepare thoughts or questions, and then we'll throw it back to the panel. 3 minutes quiet.
My question to the panel is, we keep talking about fresh food. We've talked about meat and pigs and eggs and fruit and vegetables. A lot of the stuff that's in Woolies, and Woolies is the one in Roma, is in packages. It's frozen fruit and vegetables, it's frozen pies, it's tins, and as I understand all this packaging, we see this product of New Zealand and Australia. I think the product can be New Zealand and the packaging can be somewhere, Australia, or vice versa. So how do we know that it's even Australian food that's inside that packaging? There's nothing to tell us at all.
Concern is very valid, and I think that it's one that's been recognised. There have been significant reforms put on the table for country of origin labelling to try and overcome some of those issues. And processed food is where it is very difficult. There's the new labels where it can say that it's 25% Australian product, and there's an infographic and all of that kind of stuff. So hopefully those reforms will help some of those situations, but I think there's a whole suite of complexities where processors are saying, well, I can only actually get Australian blueberries 20%, for 20% of the year. Do I have to change my labels all the time? There's a whole range of issues with that, but I think your concern is valid, and I think it is being addressed to an extent. What do you think, Heather?
Yeah, I think you covered that. I'll leave that one.
Hi, this is probably directed at all the panel, but Heather in particular. When talking about social licence to operate, I think there is a really big disparity between the reality of most food production, and that includes combinable crops and vegetables as well as protein, where the consumer has a certain idea, and we don't necessarily try and disabuse them of that idea about what it is, and then we're more vulnerable when, you know, the truth is exposed. What's your comments on how we can possibly, I guess, be a bit more honest about what we do without jeopardising the social licence to operate, and get consumers to understand that it might not look that pretty, but it's okay?
Thanks for your question. I do think it's sort of like that's the rub, really, isn't it? If we've got a community that doesn't know a lot about details of production systems, and grains is one where I've spent a fair bit of time, you know, in particular talking about the GM issue. And of course this is the whole sort of, you mentioned fresh food. I mean, I sometimes think, well, what's the grain sector going to even do with something like this? So you're right. If we've got a community that has little knowledge, and we start telling them about all this great stuff that we're doing, they're going to go, hang on a sec, what, you're not out there with a scythe anymore? What's going on? And the stuff that's in the popular media and the way agriculture presents itself sometimes, it's industry bodies that choose to bring out the old guy in a hat. You know, the way that image is being adopted by retailers sometimes perpetuates that. To be honest, I don't have the answer yet to your question. I would very much like to be able to get some evidence and try out some ideas to try to get that. But I do think we need to look particular at the media and social media landscape and popular culture, shows like Farmer Wants Wife, like MasterChef, and the kinds of stories that are told about agriculture in those particular mediums, when that's the only contact that many Australians actually have with agricultural production. I do think you have to be honest. And again, the evidence is saying, and I'm pretty sure Greg would support this, if it comes back to values, why do you need to use chemicals in broadacre agriculture? Well, because in the 80s when we used to plough a lot, there was erosion, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, we actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions when we use these things. So there's values-based communications being delivered and spoken by the people themselves, I think has to be a start.
I just wanted to add to that, because I guess I've had the benefit of working really closely with MLA on a few things where I've had the chance to take our stories to really unusual places. So we had I was on a panel of, a series of, it was a TEDx type day in Bathurst with people like Tim Flannery. There was a soil scientist, there was an economist, there was a futurist, and there was the beef producer. But I talked about, and so I crafted a story around that I thought that people who have no experience of agriculture might understand. Same thing, MLA got us onto a panel with the woman who founded 1 Million Women, which is just all about climate change. The woman who goes around rescuing rubbish from festivals, and I can't think of the scientist's name, and the host was Sarah Wilson, who was just on her up at that stage, and MLA had fortuitously signed her up as an ambassador. She's now got the I Quit Sugar books and a huge following internationally. But we did some work with her at that stage. But that was at the Sydney Festival at the end of January. So I was sort of mustering one day. The next night I'm sitting on stage at Sydney Festival sharing my story. The regional flavours in Brisbane, standing on stage with chefs with Miguel and the guy from Three Blue Ducks and those guys, talking about how I grow a tree that the cattle can eat so that it captures the carbon out of the air and it turns it into a fertiliser so that I don't have to go out and spread fertiliser like you might on your lawns. I have a natural fertiliser that comes from the roots of that tree because it's a legume. And it does that on a continuous basis, just captures that carbon and it grows this beautiful food that my cattle can eat so that you get great tasting steak. They're the sorts of ways I talk about what I do. And it takes a while to craft your stories, but each of us is responsible for crafting those stories. What I see a national brand doing is giving every industry the opportunity to not have to think about the assurance and the NVDs and the MSAs and the audits and the BMPs. They will be the things we do, which is what we're already doing. But what we get a chance to do then is actually talk about the values of why I do what I do, how I raise my family in an environment that I want to do, that I'm a multi-generational business, that I'm a 6th generation cattle producer, and talk about those sorts of stories that meet people where they're at and understand their concerns.
Thank you.
Just quickly, I mean, what I would like to say is that I think absolutely we need to be open and upfront and transparent about what we do. I think certainly depending on what industry you're in, you have to frame those messages, however, because for instance, the feedlot sector, we've done a lot of feedlot tours because we know that if consumers look at a feedlot, the first reaction is a negative one. However, if you take them and do a feedlot tour and explain the systems and the training and everything that underpins what happens at a feedlot, then their perception of feedlots invariably changes to a positive one. Now, however, if you apply that to something like a processing plant, processing plants are very confronting environments, and I don't think it's an easy sell to anyone. So I think what in our marketing that we've decided to do as a feedlot industry, we said, we determined we need to provide that information if necessary. Now, people want to seek out that information, we can have it on our website. But however, we won't go proactively out and do a communication campaign to extol the virtues of feedlots, because we know that the actual reaction will probably be a negative one, and in fact will create oxygen where there wasn't previously an issue. So it's about framing, getting the messages right and being transparent and upfront, because as Greg says, if you don't do that and you're coming from a reactive defending position, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get the upper hand in terms of winning the hearts and minds of consumers.
Okay. Could you please thank our panel?